Okay, this is going to be a short video called DAWs 101. This is basically a primer on exactly what a DAW does inside your computer, whether that be Logic, Studio One, Reason, Pro Tools, Cubase, FL Studio, or Ableton, and there are of course others as well. But basically what happens when you load up one of these DAWs inside your computer for just a few $100s, you get to do what we used to do with an entire recording studio that costs lots and lots of bucks. Let me prove it to you. So with your favorite DAW installed in your computer, you are replacing all of this equipment. Back in the old day, we would start off with a mixer and a multi-track recorder, and all the cables that would go in between that, and that was not an insignificant cost, by the way. But you know, I'm not talking about these specific models, but any particular mixer back in the day, the least you'd spend is probably a few $1,000s, and then a few $1,000s for the multi-track on the right-hand side there. So you'd be in for probably $6,000, probably another $500 in cables, and then you could record, you know, a track over onto the multi-track recorder, and that's about it. You wouldn't have any effects, you wouldn't have any other instruments. Let's start adding up all the effects. Then you would have a rack of all of these effects, and then a rack of, say, all of your guitar amps and your stomp boxes and all that stuff, as well as your associated cabinets if you're going to start recording some guitars and bass as well. So right now we have the ability to record bass and guitars with some effects onto a multi-track recorder. If you then wanted to add some synths, well, then we need to add those to bring in some sounds like your pianos or your organs or horns or any other kind of synth sound. And then you'd be adding things like samplers and drum machines. So I could conservatively say that everything you see on the right-hand side of this screen was the stuff that I grew up recording on. And this little setup here with one of each would probably be 20 grand, I would imagine. And when I say one of each, that's because in a typical DAW, you don't just have everything you see on the right-hand side. It has an inbuilt mixer, it has an inbuilt recorder, it has effects, it has guitar simulators, it has synths, it has samplers, it has drum machines, has all of this incorporated in a DAW, but it doesn't have just one. You could have as many instances as you like in terms of this. Like on the right hand side, you've got a Jupiter synth over there. You know, I would save up and have one synth, and then, you know, if I got bored with that and wanted another synth, then I'd sell that and I'd get another synth. In a DAW, you can have as many instances of these as you like. Okay, so in your typical DAW, you're going to be recording two different types of tracks. There are other things like loops and drum tracks and like that, but basically we have our MIDI tracks and our audio tracks. If we think of the MIDI tracks, they're almost like sheet music. In other words, you know, when I give you a piece of sheet music, there's no sound. It's just a flimsy piece of paper. It's just instructions to play back, say, a piano. But if you gave it to someone who was sitting in front of an electric piano, like a Rhodes, then that performance would be played by the sound of a Rhodes or the sound of an organ. That's because MIDI tracks are just instructions. There's no intrinsic audio in there. But you compare that over on the audio side, this is real audio. Things like when you plug your bass guitar in, or your guitar, or your microphone to record some vocals. These are audio tracks. Now let's actually demonstrate the difference between these MIDI tracks and audio tracks. I'm going to be using Logic in this case. Don't get hung up on that, because these very basic kind of features of MIDI and audio tracks will be equally applicable to anything else in your particular whatever DAW you're using here. So you can see that this is a MIDI track, and I can see that really there's a stark difference between this and this. This is an audio waveform. This is actual sound. This is a vocal I recorded, and this is a MIDI track. And if we go back to the top, let me turn the cycle off and we'll play it.
You're my everything. I'm so glad you're in my life.
Okay, so a very simple song. We have our MIDI track over here, and when I select that, these are MIDI notes, the MIDI note events. So you can move them up and down, you can move them left and right, change your velocity. I said before that's almost like sheet music, and in fact in Logic there is a score over here, and so you can see you can change all of these notes just around any way you like. These are just instructions. They will play back whatever is selected over here. So for example, if I went over here and went to piano and brought this one up here, now those same sets of instructions here, all those MIDI notes, will now play back this piano.
You're my everything. I'm so glad you're in my life.
So obviously, MIDI tracks are very, very flexible. They're not married to any particular sound. They're just note events that play back whatever you set up there, and they're very malleable. And there's no artifacts when you move notes around. It's just like changing the notes on sheet music. Now compare that when we go over to our vocal here. And we can do various things over here as well. It's not quite as malleable as MIDI note numbers, MIDI note events. So let's imagine, I believe this is...
So glad, so glad.
So let's imagine I wanted to move this here, that glad part. I can slide that across, and now let's listen to that.
I'm so glad you're in.
And conversely, if I recorded it that way, you can hear that that's a little bit late. I can bring that back so it's right on the money.
I'm so glad.
That's a little bit early, but you get the idea. You ought to scooch that around until you get the perfect timing. Now, it's not unlimited here. If you were to drag this all the way out here, you'll get some artifacts. Have a listen to that.
So glad.
So it's not as infinitely malleable as MIDI tracks, but however, if your phrasing is a little late or a little early, you can mess with it in audio tracks here. And then you can also go into pitch here. Actually, let me just undo that movement that I just did. And now when we go into this flex pitch, now we can move notes. So now,
I'm so glad you're in my life.
Now, the further you get away from the original pitch, you'll start getting some of those artifacts. But if you, most of the time, you're not going to be transposing things. Let me just undo that. But a lot of the time, you'll just be finally just nudging that up X number of cents to get that in pitch. So that's our track side here, but I said before that your typical DAW also replaces your mixer. So down the bottom here, we have a mixer, and it may not look exactly like some of the mixers you've been used to if you're using typical analog mixers, but you'll certainly recognize the bottom part here where you have your levels and also you have your pans. So we could adjust the...
You're my everything. I'm so glad you're in.
And obviously adjust the master as well. And you have your typical mutes and solos there. Now, on a typical mixer, you'll normally have EQ knobs. On most DAWs, when you click on EQ, you'll get something coming up, looks a little bit like this. And this is where you can actually curve your EQ. You can either do that graphically or down here, narrow and widen the Q, and there's typically some factory defaults down here. So in this case, we're keyboards here. Let's go to a refresh Rhodes, and you can see that's bumped up some low end and then taken out some of the low mids, and it's actually a pretty aggressive EQ. But let's have a listen to that.
You're my everything. I'm
So that's how you set up EQ. You can also set up compression as well. But we talked about effects. Normally you would have a rack full of effects, and typically on most DAWs you have these little blocks right here where you can drop in any particular type of effect you like. So let's imagine we're going through here and reverb, and we're going to go with this one here. So now that Rhodes is going to be going through this reverb.
so glad you're in my life.
Let me just solo that. Actually, I'm going to loop that around. So let's have a listen. And And again, you can have some presets here. So all of your effects are normally placed in line. They're almost like insert effects in the old days when you're dealing with an analog mixer. Now, if you want to set up your effects in a different way, then we can use loops. Now, effects loops are normally used in mixers, and there should be something like an aux send. You'll normally see a bunch of knobs up here. Well, in most DAWs, you'll go through here and then you'll just actually click through and say, I want to send out on bus number 1. Now, look what happens down in the mixer as soon as I select this. It's made up a new auxiliary channel that is being fed from that bus 1 and then going out to that stereo out. Let me name this something a little bit more meaningful than just aux 1. We're going to name that reverb. Now, right now, as we tweak this knob, this is going to be sending a varying amount of this Rhodes part out through here, which then goes out to the stereo out here. Do you see the flow here? This is a varying amount feeding out bus 1, and then this auxiliary channel here is being fed by bus 1. So this is going up here, through here, then to the stereo out. And the way we've got it set up now, it's actually doing nothing. We would actually need to add some effects on this aux. So I'll go down here and I'll go reverb, and we'll go stereo here. Great, so let me just close that out. So do you see the flow now? This first channel, which is my electric piano, is going through bus 1, which is feeding this, and we have some reverb there. And so now when we tweak this up and down, we'll be sending variable portions of this Rhodes out to this, and we should be hearing some reverb. Let's have a listen.
You're my everything.
Let me solo that.
I'm so glad.
And I could do the same thing with my vocal. You'll notice that that's been conveniently labeled bus 1 is going out to reverb. And then now if I unsolo that.
You're my everything. I'm so glad you're in my life.
Now you can also, if you set up your DAW in a particular way, you can automate almost anything in your DAW. So if I go back to the top here, let's ride this vocal.
You're my everything. I'm so glad you're in my life.
And we can play that back.
You're my everything. I'm so glad you're in my life.
And that's not just restricted to just automating the volume. You can automate the bus sends. You could automate almost anything. Then once you have all of your tracks in here, we have MIDI tracks, audio tracks, even drum loops, and we've set up our mixer exactly the way we want it, and maybe we've added some automation, then all we need to do is just go to the top of the song, play that back, and check our mix.
Take life for granted.
So this project lives inside of your computer. No one's going to hear it unless they come over and you press play here on your computer. You want to get this out into the wild, right? And the way you do that on most DAWs is you will bounce that out. In Logic, it's just Command B. And then what that will do is make you a stereo file, either in a PCM format, like a high quality WAV, or an AIFF file, or an MP3 file, and then you can share that with the world. That's a lightning round in terms of understanding how DAWs work. And if you want to get up to speed on your favorite DAW, then go ahead and check out our training at proaudioexp.com.